If you actually believe witches were roasted like marshmallows, or that the pilgrims were huge party animals, your high school history teacher owes you a massive refund right now. We are about to destroy your entire childhood with 25 American myths that are total lies. From fake flag makers to bathtub disasters that never happened. Before we completely ruin your reality, smash that like button and subscribe, or a ghost might haunt your toilet tonight, so buckle up because things are about to get historically stupid. 1. You probably picture the Salem Witch Trials as a giant barbecue where Puritans roasted witches like marshmallows, but that is totally Hollywood garbage. In actual reality, absolutely zero witches were burned at the stake in Salem because the English law at the time preferred neck stretching over fire. 19 poor souls were actually hanged on Gallows Hill, while one stubborn guy named Giles Corey was literally pressed to death with heavy stones because he refused to enter a plea. Imagine the townspeople screaming about witchcraft just because their milk went sour while the accused were just confused farmers. It was less about magic spells and more about neighbors hating each other, but somehow the fire myth stuck forever. 2. We all learned that Sweet Betsy Ross sat in her rocking chair and stitched the first American flag for George Washington, but that story is actually a massive lie. There is zero historical evidence that she had anything to do with the design, and the entire legend came from her grandson, William, nearly a century later, just to hype up the family name. George Washington never showed up at her upholstery shop with a pencil sketch and asked for 5 pointed stars like a demanding customer at a drive-thru. It is wild that we built an entire national myth around a lady who was just minding her own business, making flags for the Navy, while Francis Hopkinson actually designed it. 3. You probably think the first Thanksgiving was a big happy potluck where everyone held hands and sang songs, but that is a total fantasy. The reality was actually a super awkward harvest feast, where the Pilgrims and Native Americans were barely tolerating each other like a bad family reunion. There were 90 Native men who showed up with weapons, and the Pilgrims were likely terrified they were about to get wiped out instead of fed. It was not a celebration of eternal friendship, but more of a tense political meeting with some deer meat on the side. We turned a moment of nervous survival into a story about buckles and harmony just to feel better about history. 4. Disney basically lied to your face because Pocahontas and John Smith were definitely not a romantic power couple staring into the wind. In reality, she was just a little kid of about 10 or 11 years old, while Smith was a bearded grown man in his late 20s, which makes the romance story gross. The famous rescue scene where she saves his life was likely just a staged ritual that Smith totally misunderstood because he had a massive ego. She eventually married a guy named John Rolfe and died young, but we prefer the cartoon version where raccoons braid hair. It is honestly pretty weird that we turned a child into a romantic heroine for a movie. 5. Abner Doubleday gets all the credit for inventing baseball in a muddy pasture in Cooperstown, but the guy actually never saw a baseball game in his life. He was a military man who was nowhere near Cooperstown in 1839, yet somehow he became the father of our national pastime, which is hilarious. The game actually evolved slowly from British sports like rounders and cricket, so basically we just stole a game and slapped a new name on it. Doubleday would be incredibly confused to see his name on stadiums today because he was too busy firing cannons. We literally just made up a hero because admitting we borrowed the sport from England hurt our patriotic feelings. 6. Movies make you think the Old West was a non-stop shootout at high noon, with bandits falling off roofs every 5 minutes. The truth is that real cowboys almost never got into dramatic quick-draw duels because they were too busy working with cows. Most pioneer towns actually had stricter gun control laws than we do today, and forced visitors to check their weapons at the sheriff's office immediately. The violence was mostly just drunk guys punching each other in saloons rather than cool cinematic standoffs in the dusty street. It turns out that carrying 6 shooters everywhere was annoying and heavy, so most people just tried to avoid getting shot while doing their laundry. 7. Thomas Edison is treated like a wizard who magically pulled the light bulb out of his brain, but he definitely did not do it alone. He was actually just really good at buying patents and improving designs that other guys like Joseph Swan had already created years before him. Edison was more of a ruthless businessman who took a flawed idea and made it sellable rather than the sole genius inventor we worship in school. He had a whole team of guys sweating in a lab testing bamboo filaments while he took the credit for the headlines. It is classic American business to let someone else do the hard work and then slap your name on the box. 8. People love to say Benjamin Franklin wanted the turkey to be the national bird, but he never actually proposed that idea to the government. He simply wrote a private letter to his daughter, complaining that the bald eagle looked like a total jerk with bad morals because it stole food. He mentioned that the turkey was a much more respectable and courageous bird, even if it looked a little bit vain and silly. He was basically just venting about logo design to his family rather than trying to change the official seal of the country. Imagine if we actually had a gobbling turkey on the dollar bill instead of that intense eagle staring at you. 9. We shoot fireworks on July 4th because we think the founders all signed the Declaration of Independence that day, but that is historically wrong. July 4th was just the day the guys in Congress formally adopted the text, while the actual signing party happened almost a month later. Most of the famous signatures, including John Hancock, were not scribbled on the parchment until August 2nd, because getting everyone in one room was a nightmare. We are literally celebrating the day the paperwork was approved rather than the day they put ink to paper. It is just funny that we hold barbecues on the wrong date, because the founders were terrible at scheduling their meetings on time. 10. A popular internet theory claims the Salem Witch Trials were caused by people tripping on moldy rye bread, but that is totally debunked science. The theory says a fungus called ergot made everyone hallucinate demons, but the symptoms of ergotism like gangrene do not match what the girls described. If the whole town was eating poisoned bread, then everyone would have been tripping and losing fingers, not just a few teenage girls acting weird. The truth is much more boring and sad because it was just plain old social panic and acting out for attention. We just want to blame magical mold because admitting that humans can be that cruel to each other is too depressing. 11. You have likely heard the embarrassing rumor that President William Howard Taft got his large body wedge stuck in the White House bathtub. It is a hilarious image of a president needing butter to slide out, but it is actually a total lie. Taft knew he was a big guy, so he had massive, custom bathtubs installed that could fit 4 regular-sized men comfortably. The story was just a nasty joke spread by his political enemies to make him look like an incompetent buffoon. There is absolutely no official record of a presidential extraction team pulling him out of the plumbing. We just love fat jokes so much that we rewrote history to humiliate a president for no reason. 12. The Liberty Bell is our biggest symbol of freedom, but the story that it cracked while ringing for independence in 1776 is pure fiction. It actually sat there perfectly fine on that day, and nobody even called it the Liberty Bell until the abolitionists came along much later. The famous crack actually appeared sometime in the 1840s, possibly during a birthday party for George Washington, or just from bad casting. We treat this broken piece of metal like a holy relic from the Revolution, but it barely made a sound when the Declaration was signed. It is basically just a defective bell that became famous because it broke, and Americans love a good underdog story with a flaw. 13. Everyone loves to say that Albert Einstein failed math in school to make themselves feel better about their own bad grades. This is completely false because Einstein was actually a child prodigy who was mastering complex calculus before he could even drive a car. The rumor started because the school he attended reversed its grading scale so a top grade looked like a failing grade to outsiders. He looked at a math test the way a normal person looks at a lunch menu and destroyed it every time. Telling your mom that even a genius failed algebra is a nice excuse, but sadly you just need to study harder because Einstein was never bad at numbers. 14. The legend says that Orson Welles narrated a radio show about aliens, and millions of Americans ran into the streets screaming in terror. The truth is that hardly anyone was actually listening to that station, and the reports of mass suicides and panic were totally fake news. Newspapers at the time hated the radio industry, so they exaggerated the story to make radio look dangerous and irresponsible. A few confused people might have called the police, but the nation did not collapse into chaos over a fake Martian invasion. We love the idea of our grandparents being gullible idiots, but mostly they were just listening to a comedy show on another channel. 15. We remember the Alamo as a heroic last stand for pure freedom, but there is a darker side that textbooks conveniently forget to mention. One of the main reasons the Texas rebels were fighting Mexico was because Mexico had banned slavery, and the settlers wanted to keep their slaves. The heroes we worship were definitely brave, but they were also fighting for the right to own other human beings, which ruins the vibe. It was not just about liberty and independence, but also about protecting an economy built on forced labor. It is a lot harder to cheer for the good guys when you realize their version of freedom included chains. 16. You probably think your last name was changed by a lazy clerk at Ellis Island who could not spell, but that is a total myth. The inspectors actually worked off ship manifests that were written back in Europe, so they had the correct spelling right in front of them. Most name changes actually happened years later when immigrants wanted to sound more American to get better jobs or fit in. Blaming a tired government worker for your name being Smith instead of Schmidt is just a family legend we use to explain our history. The government was actually surprisingly efficient at bureaucracy, and they rarely just made up random noises for names. 17. When you were a kid, you might have imagined the Underground Railroad as a literal subway train running beneath the dirt with steam engines. The reality was obviously just a metaphor for a secret network of safe houses and brave people hiding escaped slaves in barns. There were no tracks or conductors punching tickets, but rather a dangerous game of hide and seek with slave catchers in the woods. It is kind of funny that our brains take the name so literally, but the real story is much more heroic than a magic train. It was just ordinary people risking their lives to help others walk hundreds of miles to freedom in the dark. 18. Everyone assumes that during Prohibition, the cops would kick down your door just for holding a glass of beer in your own hand. The law actually never made it illegal to drink alcohol. It only banned the manufacturing, selling, and transporting of the booze. If you had a massive wine cellar stocked up before the law passed, you could legally sit at home and get wasted every single night. The government was trying to stop the business of alcohol, but they did not technically outlaw the act of swallowing it. It is a weird loophole that rich people exploited while everyone else had to buy dangerous moonshine from shady gangsters in alleys. 19. The image of angry feminists burning their bras in a giant bonfire is one of the most famous symbols of the 60s that never happened. At the famous Miss America protest, the women actually just threw items like bras and high heels into a freedom trash can. They wanted to burn it, but the police department refused to give them a fire permit, so the bras just sat there in the bin. A reporter compared it to draft card burning, and the media ran with the fiery image because it sounded way more dramatic. We invented a fire because a group of women standing around a garbage can is not exciting news. 20. We like to pretend that the North was always the good guy zone, while the South was the only place with slaves. The awkward truth is that slavery existed in all the northern colonies, and states like New York had tons of enslaved people for a long time. The North did not fully abolish slavery until decades after the country was founded, and they still profited from the cotton trade. Wall Street and northern banks were literally built on money made from the slave system, even after they outlawed it locally. It is much easier to point fingers at the South than to admit the whole country was complicit. 21. The movies promised us that the Wild West was a non-stop murder zone where everyone shot their neighbor for looking at them wrong. The boring reality is that most frontier towns were actually safer than modern cities because business owners hated violence. Town leaders knew that dead customers do not buy whiskey, so they enforced strict bans on carrying weapons inside city limits. The famous gunfights were extremely rare events that got blown out of proportion by dime novels trying to sell books to bored city people. You were statistically more likely to die from falling off a horse than from a high noon duel. We just prefer the bloody version because watching people follow laws is terrible television. 22. Every Western movie shows tough guys wearing massive 10-gallon Stetson hats, but that is historically wrong fashion. Real cowboys in the late 19th century actually preferred wearing bowler hats or derby hats, which makes them look like bankers. The big Stetson was expensive and impractical for wind, so most guys just wore whatever wool cap they brought from the East Coast. Imagine a tough outlaw robbing a train while wearing a polite little bowler hat like Charlie Chaplin, and you have the accurate picture. We only switched to the big cowboy hats later because they looked cooler in photographs and movies. It is funny that the symbol of the rugged West was actually a hat for city gentlemen. 23. We love the story that American farmers defeated the British Army by hiding behind trees and shooting like ninjas while the British stood in straight lines. That is a nice underdog fantasy. But the Continental Army actually won by learning to fight exactly like the Europeans. George Washington worked hard to train his troops in traditional line formations because hiding in the woods does not actually win major battles. The war was decided by standard military tactics and bayonet charges rather than just guerrilla warfare in the bushes. We tell the tree story because it makes us feel smarter than the British, but really we just copied their homework to beat them. 24. Plymouth Rock is basically just a random gray stone that tourists stare at because they think the Pilgrims stepped on it first. The truth is that the Pilgrims actually landed in Provincetown first, and nobody mentioned any specific rock for over 100 years. The story was invented by a 94-year-old man named Thomas Faunce, who claimed his father told him about it years later. It is literally just a pebble that we decided to make famous to sell souvenirs to patriotic travelers who needed a photo opportunity. The poor rock has been moved and broken so many times for a lie that it is barely even a rock anymore. 25. The story that Dutch settlers bought the entire island of Manhattan for $24 in beads is the biggest real estate lie ever told. The trade actually involved goods worth about 60 guilders, which was a lot of money back then, but the real issue was a cultural misunderstanding. The Native Americans likely thought they were agreeing to share the land temporarily, rather than selling it forever like a used car. They had no concept of owning the earth, so they probably thought the Europeans were stupid for paying for air. We tell the bead story to make the settlers look like shrewd businessmen, instead of admitting they just confused the locals to take their home. Congratulations, your entire childhood history class was a scam, and now you know the truth about everything from fake witches to bowler hats. If you want to stop being wrong at parties, smash that like button and subscribe to Liebuster immediately, or George Washington's ghost might actually haunt your bathroom. Drop a comment below and tell me which myth hurt you the most. Was it the lies about the Alamo? Or finding out Einstein was actually a genius? Click this video on your screen right now to uncover even crazier lies, because we are just getting started destroying your reality.